Good evening and welcome to episode 101. Episode 101 of the Political Mike podcast. In 2008, something happened that didn't happen before since 1976. North Carolina flipped blue. Traditionally ruby red counties like Jackson County, Hyde County, and Caswell County voted for the Democratic Party's nominee for president, then Senator Barack Obama of Illinois. In 2008, Senator Obama beat Senator John McCain, Republican nominee, by less than 15,000 votes. That was the same year the state elected its last Democratic senator, Kay Hagan, the Democratic nominee for Senate, garnered most of the vote among 18 to 29-year-olds, riding on the coattails of the Obama campaign's success and drawing young people to the polls. She also scored high among people who disapproved of President Bush and received the near absolute support of Black voters, according to exit polls. Lieutenant Governor Bev Perdue won a tight race to replace Governor Mike Easley, a fellow Democrat who was on his way out after 2 terms. And Ms. Perdue beat Mayor Pat McCrory of Charlotte, North Carolina, the Republican nominee. And she became the first woman elected as North Carolina governor. Her victory sealed the Democrats' hold in the state government as they retained their majorities in the state legislature. In 2010, however, Republicans won both chambers of the state legislature, which they still hold. In 2012, the Republican nominee for president, Mitt Romney, won North Carolina in 2012 by 2 percentage points. Fast forward to 2016, and Donald Trump ended up sweeping the state above his opponent, Hillary Clinton. And in 2022, most recently, the GOP saw more victories, with the Senate nominee Ted Budd beating Democrat Sherry Beasley by more than 100,000 votes. And Democrats lost races for the state Supreme Court that year as well. Republicans nearly won a supermajority in the state legislature, which they would need to override Governor Cooper's veto power. At age 25, Anderson Clayton has been given a difficult task: improve Democrats' record in North Carolina. In February, Ms. Clayton was elected to a 2-year term as the new chair of the state party, ousting first-term chair Bobby Richardson, the first Black person in the role. The upset made Ms. Clayton the youngest state chair of the Democratic Party in the country. Her win came even as Richardson had the backing of the entire state Democratic congressional delegation, Democratic Governor Roy Cooper, and the Democratic Attorney General Josh Stein, who is now running to succeed Governor Cooper. A graduate of Appalachian State University in the mountains of North Carolina, Ms. Clayton initially got involved with registering voters on campus. She then worked on one of North Carolina Representative Kathy Manning's campaigns. She made her way to national politics as a staffer in the 2020 presidential campaigns for Vice President Kamala Harris and Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren. After that, she worked for Kentucky Democrat Amy McGrath's failed 2020 campaign against Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. And she became the chair of the Person County Democratic Party in 2021 and helped flip control of the local Rockford City Council. As the state chair, however, she will face large challenges. While Cooper twice won election as the state's governor, a Democratic presidential nominee has only won the state once in the last 40 years, and that was in 2008 when Obama beat McCain by less than 15,000 votes. Ms. Anderson Clayton, thank you so much for being a part of the Political Mike tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Mike, for having me. I'm really excited about it and just happy to be here. So thank you for that.
I want to start the conversation by talking a little bit about you. Could you explain, your rise to becoming the Democratic chair of the state of North Carolina, the youngest party chair in the country? How did this happen?
Through sheer willpower, and I tell folks a little bit of anger sometimes. I ran into someone the other day that described running for office. They said, I'm not afraid to run against someone that's been in the game for a long time. I'm afraid to run against a young person, someone who's hungry for it, and someone who really has the drive, I think, and determination to want to see things look differently than what they do right now in our state. And for me, I think one of the driving factors about why you see young people right now across North Carolina really trying to get more involved with statewide politics is because they see the need and the desire for young people to really take on what's our future, right? And I think that folks tell me all the time, young people, Anderson, I don't see where the next generation of young political operatives are. And I tell them all the time, I do. And they're sitting on college campuses, in high schools right now every day, and people that want to get active but just don't know how. And so I have come from a small town in Person County called Roxborough. It's literally called that because it has a lot of rocks in it, to be honest with you, Mike. And one of the things that I tell people is growing up in a rural community, the 2 things that you didn't talk about were religion and politics, right? Because just not something you discuss at the dinner table. And I grew up, though, always being really civically engaged, though, and really civically minded. My parents always watched the news and part of that was because you didn't know what was going on otherwise in a rural area unless you did. And so I think that a lot of us grew up with the mentality of like, you have to know what's going on, and you have to start paying attention to news stations, but also like kind of what is going on in the world around you, because you live in a rural area that is more remote. And that was always what I was really pushed to do as a young person. And so growing up in a rural area in North Carolina, I always thought that I had to leave it. I had too big of ideas or too big of a world perspective about what I wanted, the type of place I wanted to grow up in. And I feel like a lot of rural young folks are felt to feel that way when they're growing up in communities like what we exist in as rural people. And really, when you think that you want to change that and you have the ideas to, people don't really necessarily accept that sometimes. And so my mission and my vision with this is to challenge and make it so that rural young folks everywhere feel like you can do anything and that you can change your own backyard. And always that the opportunity that we have as Democrats is to show people you can build opportunity anywhere. And really, that's what I want to bring to this role, and hopefully young folks across the state too.
Now, you seem to have been the underdog in this race to become the party chair. You had your opponent getting the support and the backing of a lot of the Democratic party's establishment in the state of North Carolina. How did you overcome, all the obstacles that came with being the underdog in this kind of race?
Yeah, a lot of grassroots energy and the ability to say we're not going to give up. We had a lot of people that did events. We went out and we tried to do a campaign in all of our rural counties, and at least made sure everybody of the state executive committee is the body that elects state party chairs across every state. They're different in every state for how many people are a part of them to some degree. North Carolina has the largest state executive committee out of any state in the country. We have over 600 people that help elect a state party chair, but also that are a part of the executive committee that runs our state party at the end of the day. And so making sure that we had dialed and talked to all of those people within 2 months was a really big challenge. When you're thinking about, if for any of my field organizers out there that know what a contact rate looks like on campaigns, it is not high usually. And so a lot of times it was trial and error by trying to get somebody on the phone and then trying to get them through email or trying to get them through a Facebook message or a Twitter DM or even going out to their county at the end of the day. And we sent out mailers to all of the SEC members. We had some really great young folks that made an amazing website. And I tell people all the time, like, the coolest part about my campaign was that everyone that worked on it was under the age of 30. And they were people that were really excited to build a new direction forward for the Democratic Party. And I think that folks just really got to see the professionalization of what this could look like and how much somebody wanted to be in a chair's role. Historically in North Carolina, and honestly across the country, you usually have people that are more established political figures that end up becoming state party chairs. And for me, we really wanted to change the dynamic about, a grassroots organizer in charge of the party, and like, what difference could that make for how we actually look at organizing communities in all 100 counties across North Carolina.
Do you believe that North Carolina was overlooked in this past midterm election? And I ask that in light of the very close race between Ted Budd and Sherry Beasley. I said from the outset, and even on this program, I've had DNC Chair Jamie Harris, and I asked him about the DNC's efforts in states like North Carolina. I thought that the DNC should have invested more in North Carolina much earlier, at least by the time, right after that Supreme Court ruling on June 24th. That overturned Roe versus Wade. I thought that was a missed opportunity. And, when you look at the fact that it was less than 100,000, I think around 100,000 votes, but, that race wasn't as, to me, talked about or at least focused on as much as other Senate races like the one in Ohio, which was another close one between Tim Ryan and J.D. Vance. You had, of course, Pennsylvania, that getting a lot of energy with the now incumbent senator who was a Democrat against Dr. Oz. I thought North Carolina was a missed opportunity. What are your thoughts about this past midterm as it pertains to North Carolina?
Well, you're never going to hear me as a party chair be like, I don't want money quicker and sooner on the ground than I do any other time. But I think that there were a lot of things that happened in North Carolina this last cycle that contributed to why we did not have a successful United States Senate race. 134,000 votes is what Sherry Beasley lost by in this cycle. And one of the things that I look at is that we had Democratic turnout that was lower in counties like Mecklenburg that we really needed to have an increased voter turnout in, that are heavily Black populations there. We did not tap into as a party. And also in places that look like Nash, Edgecombe, Washington, Anson counties that have been in the past historically Democratic, but also were not this year to some degree as well. Sherry Beasley won Washington County in North Carolina, which is a county in the northeastern part of our state, majority minority county, but only won it by 6 votes. And so one of the things that we have to look at there is why did that happen? And it's because we don't have enough strong county party infrastructure, in my opinion, in all 100 counties across North Carolina to really be helping the groundswell from the bottom up. I'm a rural county party chair at heart, so I'm not looking for anybody to come in and save me. And that is what I feel like a lot of times we, as swing states to some degree, or states that were trending in a certain direction, kind of look to the national party to be able to do. Michigan and Wisconsin, how they are able to operate and how they've been able to be so successful is that their state parties have built their own programs and really in the sense of built their own coordinated campaign that lasts and is separated from their actual coordinated campaign from federal and national offices. And I think that more state parties have got to get in the habit of really creating a donor base from the ground up. Not saying that I don't think the national party should have invested more money here. I absolutely do. I think there's a reason why, we saw what we saw this last cycle and how much of a cost benefit analysis it would have been to invest a little bit more money into North Carolina. But when it comes to actually looking at what we're going to try to do this year to be prepared for 2024, I'm really trying to make sure that we have the ground game going beforehand before we try to even look at getting national investment so that they really want to see us as a battleground and that they can this year too. Strong state parties can do a lot when they have the resources early on, and kind of taking a tune from Emily's list where they say, early money is like yeast, it makes the dough rise and everything. And I fully believe that about state parties too. When we fund them early on and they can actually have a grassroots organizing effort going early, we're more successful in campaigns. And that just wasn't able to happen in North Carolina in 2022.
So I'm from, North Carolina, from Columbus County, small town.
Love that. I did not know that. I'm sorry about that. Awesome.
but I say that because I know the power of, grassroots organizing, right? I've been a part of efforts in the 2012 campaign and 2014, and I've seen it, the power of, relationship building in that effort. Despite the fact that the county I grew up in is heavily Republican, there seemed to have been more energy during the Obama years than after. I wonder, what is your strategy for reigniting that energy in rural counties in North Carolina, being able to drive out large amounts of voters in counties that usually get looked over, drive-through counties, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, North Carolina has the second largest rural population in comparison to Texas, right? Like they're number one, obviously, but we're number two when it comes to how diverse and how many people we have in rural North Carolina. And I think that one of the things that I want to do is just show up. We were in Union County last week, and we've done throughout my campaign, just kind of stopped in every county. I've been up in Washington County throughout that, and just kind of trying to see where can we actually show up and energize rural Democrats? I tell folks, I'm like, there's a difference with trying to talk to rural voters and trying to talk to rural Democrats. And I wish we would do the latter one before we even try to do the first one sometimes as a party, because I think that we've left our own voters out to dry. And there's a whole part about when people look at me and they say, why do you always say that we left our party behind? And there's this really interesting dynamic and framing around some people not wanting us to say that. And I'm like, but we need to. Us as a Democratic Party need to take ownership over the fact that we did leave rural Democrats behind when we dubbed rural North Carolina and rural America, honestly, as Trump country. And we decided those areas were not worth going into anymore or worth organizing in anymore. And I'm like, but rural North Carolina, as you well know, Mike, right? Diverse. We have a lot of Black and brown populations that exist in these communities that need to hear from our party, need to know that our party is going to fight for them, and also need to know that our party understands what's going on in their own backyard. We need to know what's going on in Columbus County and be talking about it at the state level. And we haven't been. And I think that that's a huge part of our problem right now, is that we've left behind a lot of that, what you're talking about, the grassroots energy and understanding and actually knowing what's going on the ground with people. So I really want to be able to show up. I want to be able to engage young folks in these counties. I want to be able to show rural counties that wins are possible in them. And I think that's part of just motivating folks, because we do have counties where we should have Democrats elected to city councils and county commissions. And we don't right now because we haven't played in those counties a long time.
So, this past election was interesting because at first there was a lot of pundits. There were a lot of pundits speculating that the election would be about the immigration crisis and the ongoing inflation. That all changed after Roe versus Wade. It seemed to be a totally different election. And of course, there were folks saying, well, overestimate how much that Supreme Court ruling may play into this election. And lo and behold, it seemed to have had a significant role in the way things played out in North Carolina. You know, the two candidates for Senate, Beasley and Budd, seem to be tied pretty much around 44%, pretty much around the waning days of the summer. And only until, you know, by the time you get to October, do you start to see a breakaway with Budd. And bringing it back to the issues that North Carolinians may be, you know, more pressed and concerned about. What is your plan in terms of being able to combat some of the arguments that the Republicans have made that the Democrats are not the party that can keep you safe as it pertains to crime? The Democrats are weak on the border. The Democrats have, are responsible for inflation. You know, despite the fact that that's not how economics works. Of course, we came out of a pandemic situation, and it was a worldwide financial crisis that followed. You know, the fact that they're able to make this argument seems to resonate with a lot of folks, especially in rural parts of North Carolina. What's your plan to combat those arguments as we're heading into the 2024 election cycle?
Acknowledging the issues that they represent, which is the fact that like safety is a problem in rural North Carolina right now. When you're looking at the fact that like someone is dying every other week in your community from gun violence, like we do have a problem there, and folks are not taking that as seriously as they need to. And I'm like, in a rural community, when somebody dies, like that is their community, right? Like it's not just like and it should never be this way in any sense. But I just think like people are taking these issues too lightly. And I also think the same thing about inflation. Like Democrats are somehow afraid to acknowledge the fact that like prices have gone up on things. And I'm like, why? We should be talking about how hard it is to afford a grocery bill right now, how much gas does cost in some capacities, because like those are the things that people are dealing with every day. But we also have to talk about the fact that we are fighting those inflation prices, and Democrats are trying to get those prices down. And they're actually trying to talk about those issues whereas Republicans, I feel like, are drawing us into more partisan bickering and honestly trying to work against getting those issues and those problems actually solved at the end of the day. I mean, in North Carolina alone, you have a hard fight right now going on about CRT. And, people have been assured from every Republican school superintendent that you can find that CRT is not being taught in K through 12 schools, but Republicans are using that right now, right? That's the only thing they want to talk about. And for me, I think that Democrats have got to get ahead of the messaging when it comes to talking about the issues that we really care about, like publicly funding public education again, and actually making that a priority. North Carolina is 48th for funding public schools right now, when we used to be one of the top in the country, right? Under Terry Sanford and Jim Hunt, and under an era of Democrats that actually wanted to invest in public schools. And I think that prioritizing that, understanding where we've come from and what Democrats have always stood for, but making sure that we can really give that vision for people in the future. And I said it before when I first got on here, but opportunity everywhere. Like that is the Democratic message this year, and what eventually the American Rescue Plan and the bipartisan infrastructure bill are actually giving to communities in North Carolina right now, especially rural communities that got $6 million worth of investment in American Rescue Plans to fix infrastructure that they've had lacking for years in their communities. And Democrats honestly looked at rural North Carolina and they said, and rural America, with these two pieces of historic legislation, and they said, we believe that you should have a future 50 years from now. Now you need to get to city council meetings and county commissioner meetings and help us figure out what that future is going to look like. Because with broadband access in rural communities, that opens up the economic ability of these areas for the first time, I feel like, in history. When we're looking at the decline of manufacturing across rural North Carolina, but also across rural America, and back in 2008, when you had a crash and when we had labor leaving the United States to go somewhere else and to have cheaper labor, honestly, in other places, we saw a huge decline in rural economies. And I think that being able to say the Democratic Party is actually here to help rebuild rural economies, and we're trying to diversify them actually with broadband expansion and with new ways of economic development, because we know that 50% of the workforce right now in the United States comes from small businesses. And that's what we're trying to promote right now. There's a huge connection point there. It's complicated. And that's the other thing that I hate to say right now about a Democratic message, is that we're doing a lot, and we're doing a lot of really good things, and figuring out how to decipher that and distill it down is complicated. So I'm working on the other ways to do that right now, Mike. But if you have suggestions and thoughts, I'm always here to open ears to take them. And anybody listening to this right now, my email is on the NCDP website. If you've got ideas about how we should be framing things, messaging things, I'm always open and happy to hear.
So last Tuesday was an interesting time for North Carolina, because that was the day where the North Carolina Supreme Court revisited a case surrounding voter ID requirements. This is the second case the GOP said it would rehear since taking over in November. Republican candidates won both Supreme Court races on the ballot in November, taking the court from a 4-3 Democratic majority to a 5-2 GOP majority. In December, before the new justices took their seats, the court ruled to uphold a trial court ruling which held that the 2018 voter ID law was unconstitutional and violated the rights of Black voters. When you look at the fact that in North Carolina, President Biden lost to former President Trump by less than 1.5 points in the state, and that's according to Politico. You see the effect that voter ID laws can play, because when you're looking at a state that really should be still a swing state, even though folks have said North Carolina is still now safely in the Republican column since 2016, it's still technically a swing state when you look at the margins.
We get a Democratic governor, Mike. I don't know how anybody's calling me a Republican state right now. We've won the last 8 out of 8 attorney general races, and we've won the last 7 out of 8 governor's races. I'm like, North Carolina's still a swing state. I'm claiming that title always, just because my legislature is doing something funky, and gerrymandering is helping with that, which goes back to those Supreme Court cases that you're talking about. So give it to me. But yeah.
So the 3 key North Carolina justices signaled a degree of hostility to the arguments brought by attorneys representing the groups that defended the current congressional maps in the state. The court took up the question of fairness of the state's maps after the makeup of the court changed this past November. I want to get your thoughts about the oral arguments that were taking place during that hearing, and the ultimate decision by the court, that resulted this past Tuesday.
I mean, I think that either way, Republicans right now, we've seen from this court that they're going to do everything that they can to bow at the will of a Republican General Assembly. And our Republican General Assembly has already said, we want to be able to draw our own maps. We want to be able to draw our own seats. We should be able to do that. Why should we not? And I'm like, because the court's already decided that that wasn't fair and it wasn't done in the way that it should have been. And I think that just because we now have a Republican majority on that court doesn't mean you get to go back and decide that a decision that already has come down or that we should go back on that, right? That's only happened at least, I think, out of 196, they said of these that have been brought back up, only 2 have actually ever been heard in court history for actually rehearing a case and a decision that had been done because new evidence had come to light on it, regardless of whether the court makeup had shifted. And I think that we really are seeing the most partisan court that we have in our state's history when it comes to siding with the Republican Party. And Democrats honestly ran, and I love all of my Democratic judges that ran this last cycle and my Democratic justices that ran this last cycle, but Democrats have always been on the side of that, a court is supposed to remain impartial, that we are supposed to have at some point in time somebody that says fair and balanced and impartial is right. And unfortunately, the Republican Party, I think, has just pushed this to being where, no, you have to play partisanship, honestly, in a judge's race now because they've decided that. And this decision has decided that. And it's going to disenfranchise so many voters across North Carolina, particularly when you're looking at Black and brown voters when it comes to redistricting, racial gerrymandering. Take A&T as a great example right now. One of our historically Black colleges and universities, right in North Carolina, Mike, that is literally split right down the middle. Half of their campus is in one district and half of their campus is in the other. And they vote on 2 completely different polling locations. That's splitting 5,000 students on one side and 5,000 students on the other in order to break up that campus. I mean, we're talking about really people's right to vote at the end of the day and whether or not that's sacred. And I think that we should never be making it harder for people to vote. And unfortunately, Republicans in North Carolina have decided that's their fun target right now, is to try to figure out how to do that even more.
So the arguments have been made that, voter ID laws, of course, would make it safer and improve voter confidence. And you even have someone who was arguing that, this would not have a discriminatory effect. You had someone arguing that specifically, there are 2 sides to the argument, and the side that loses believes that we misapprehend the law and got it wrong. And so he says, where do we draw the line? He says, when you look at the SB 824, there's no person in North Carolina that the plaintiffs have identified who, according to the terms of the bill, will not be able to vote. And it just does not speak to discriminatory intent, racially discriminatory intent to enact a voter ID law that allows everyone to vote, and the availability of the free IDs during early voting is particularly important. What is your response to that take of this bill and the possible effects of this bill?
I mean, I go back to, once again, anything that is disenfranchising elderly folks, people that may or may not have a license still, and also can't necessarily get to a DMV in order to get a temporary identification card or whatever that they might offer instead of a license if you're not able to drive. I think that the luxury that you have to be able to think about how you're going to have that in your everyday life is something that Republicans that are making these laws right now are not having to think about every day. And so I really believe it just disenfranchises people who may not have the ability to say, I do have a car and I do have a license, but also that I have a way to get to somewhere that could give me an identification card or a way to identify myself when I go in to vote. I think that we should always be making it easier to vote, not harder. So that's what I would say to that.
Of course. And we're now entering a period of time where a lot of folks are getting anxious because, of course, when you look at the district attorney in the state of New York and the charges that are now impending against former President Donald Trump pertaining to hush money payments to a porn star, there are many who are fearing in the Democratic camp that this could potentially be a political boost for the former president in his quest to reseat the White House. You have also people, raising alarm that this could result in more political violence. Just like the violence we saw on January the 6th, the violence we saw on October 28th of 2022 against Speaker Pelosi's husband. How do you assess, possible indictments playing a role in the DNC's chances in North Carolina to continue to galvanize support? Do you think that it's going to be a negative or a plus? And if you could also touch on the potential for more political violence as a result of an indictment charge.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, because I thought that indictment charge was going to come down on Tuesday, I didn't have my staff work in Goodwin House that day. And Goodwin House is the NCDP headquarters here in Raleigh that we have. Just for the safety fact alone, the state party has definitely gotten threats before, death threats. All of our staff has absolutely had folks target them and attack them online, but also through our website, which is one of the reasons why the NCDP does not have our staff names listed on our website anymore, because of our state SBI had told us not to do that. And so part of just the fact of being in politics right now is that it is an extremely, I think, volatile experience to some degree. And we've gotten away from the fact that we can cordially and kindly disagree with people on issues sometimes, especially when you have a former president that has supercharged a very volatile group of people when it comes to partisanship and not even just partisanship, I feel like, but just extremism ideas that have no place in parties and in politics, in my opinion. And so I think that that's a huge component of this. And one of the ways that we're planning to combat that in North Carolina is make sure that we're talking about the issues that really impact people every day. One of the things that I tell people all the time that really frustrates me, honestly, about the Democratic Party is that folks can tell me who George Santos is, what he did or did not eat for breakfast this morning in every county he represents in New York, but they cannot tell me who the 5 people on their board of county commissioners are. Everyone can tell me that Donald Trump is supposed to be indicted and when he is supposed to happen, but nobody can tell me what's going on with their American Rescue Plan dollars in their counties. And we're really trying to focus a localized message right now about what's happening in our state legislature is absolutely and unacceptable for moving this state forward. And part of us getting away from a national rhetoric, or at least in the capacity of talking more and more about people that aren't in office anymore, quite frankly, Mike, is trying to make sure that folks are paying attention and getting angry, honestly, about what's going on in North Carolina right now. Because we're defunding education every day. The state legislature yesterday just tried to pass a bill that would give over $1 billion to private subsidies going towards private schools and religious schools in our state. We have a huge opportunity right now, I think, to call out Republican extremism, even at a state level. And that's what I'm really prioritizing this upcoming year.
And as it pertains to the Democrats' efforts to prohibit or restrict the sale or ban assault weapons, despite the, and that's, of course, coming off the heels of the recent victory they had this past summer in the aftermath of yet another devastating mass shooting in an elementary school in Texas, Robb Elementary School. You had another shooting before that in Buffalo, New York. How do you navigate in a a state that's largely a rural state, where gun ownership is popular, to convey to, folks that, we're not attacking gun ownership, but we are trying to keep, your kids in school safe at the same time. How do you walk that fine line as DNC chair, especially now that we're entering yet another election season? And there's going to be characterizations from the other side that, quite frankly, the Democratic Party is a socialist party that wants to take away your guns and take away your way of life.
I'd say that we don't. And I'd say that or at least we don't want to take away your guns. But I do think that like most rural people would agree with the fact that no one should be walking around with an AK-47 necessarily strapped to the back all the time. And I think that one of the things that we've got to realize is how we talk about this issue, particularly in a rural area, and like talking about it as gun safety and really leaning into sheriff's offices and Democratic sheriffs that we still have in a lot of these counties. And I'm thinking about Sheriff Dance, particularly in Pitt County, who is a rock star at talking about this issue, but also uplifting people in my party that have a real, I think, ability to navigate this a lot better. Because I'll be honest with you and say, like, this is still kind of formulating for me. I don't think that the Democratic Party knows how to talk about gun control in the best way, or else we'd probably be winning more elections than what we are right now to some degree too. But I think that and especially in rural places in that matter. But we do have a long way to go in trying to reestablish that we're not here to take away guns by saying that first and foremost, but also saying that we do have a right to see and we want to see our community safer. And how do we talk about gun safety and what that can look like? But even in particular, and I feel like I need to stress this too, like that's not just a white male issue. Like that also happens in Black males in rural places and rural communities, particularly, who do still own guns. And that is a huge kind of turn off from the Democratic Party that we've seen, at least, and that I've seen at least in my own community when talking to a population that has already kind of left the Democratic Party to some degree or feels alienated by them as well. And so we've got to change the messaging on how we're talking about those issues. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to work on right now, figuring out, well, what is the message that we need to give on that and how do we frame it appropriately?
And in the same vein of messaging, the Democrats have put a lot of points on the board. You mentioned the American Rescue Plan. You also have the bipartisan infrastructure deal that was signed into law in November 2021. You have the CHIPS Act, the PACT Act. You have the gun bill that we talked about just now, and other pieces of legislation that are going to have meaningful effects for Americans and specifically North Carolinians. What is your plan to educate folks about what the Democratic Party has done, especially when folks start to think about that question Reagan posed back in October of 1980? Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Should we reelect the Democrats that are currently sitting in the state house? Should we elect another Democrat to the governor's mansion? Should we reelect President Biden? What's your strategy in terms of getting people to realize what has been done already, and setting the record straight?
Yeah, I mean, boots on the ground, making sure that people have heard that message and ensuring that they're also taking advantages of the programs that come out of those two pieces of legislation, and honestly 3 or 4 that you just named, but specifically from the American Rescue Plan and bipartisan infrastructure bill. My background is in broadband, and one of the most amazing programs that came out of that, those two pieces of legislation, was the Affordable Connectivity Program. It's $30 off a month of anyone's internet bill that makes below 200% below the poverty line in North Carolina, which is $44,000 a year. Most people that are listening to this from a rural area is going, I don't make $44,000 a year. Like, that's a good job, Anderson. What are you talking about? And I'm like, no, you're poor. Honestly, like that's what that means. If you make $44,000 a year or below it right now in this economy, it means that you're probably not able to feed your family as much as you'd like to, or take care of them as much as you'd like to in some capacities, because you're struggling at the end of the day to pay your bills, to feed everybody, and to make sure that you're surviving day after day. And so ensuring that, like, that's one bill and that's one thing that Democrats have done to me that's like taking something off your plate every month. And I think it's educating people around that, which means having strong messengers in every Democratic community. And that's part of the party's job, in my opinion, is to build up strong 100 counties or strong 100 county parties across our state in order to be able to deliver those messages, but also knock doors with those messages and be able to carry that into those communities and really becoming a part of the community. I think that the thing that we did in Person County that I believe is the way forward for the Democratic Party is we really looked at how do we make ourselves a place of resources and a place of help. And anybody in Person County could look at it and go, I may not like that Democratic Party chairwoman, but I know I can get some help from her if I need it. I know that she's got my back. And I'm like, That's what we want every community to feel like about the Democratic Party. We want folks in the communities that are Republicans, unaffiliated, independents, I don't care, Democrats especially, to know that your party's there for you and that the Democrats are the place that you can go find whatever you need. They're there to help you.
So, of course, as you know, the youngest party chair in the country, there are a lot of young people who are giving you a look now. What's your plan to incorporate them in the political process? Making debates more accessible, watching debates more accessible as we're entering into another political season, getting them more involved, making them feel like they have a stake in not just national politics, but state and local politics as well.
Yeah, lowering the barrier of entry to our party. I think that there are so many people that don't know how to get involved with the Democratic Party right now. That are teen Dems, college Dems, young Dems, people in general that just don't really know how to get in and how to be a part of this party. And so one of the things that I'll tell anybody is that anybody below the age that is 35 or below, you're considered a young Democrat. And so there are Young Democrats of America, but there's also Young Democrats of North Carolina. And www.ydnc.org is a great website that you can go to get involved and hopefully make sure that you're a part of this party. We're going to be doing educational and also organizing meetings on all 16 UNC system campus schools in the fall. And so really trying to energize young people, but make sure that college campuses have a College Dems chapter and are geared up and ready to go to hopefully host a candidate on their campus, but also be in charge of registering young people. The folks that know how to organize young folks are themselves. And so for me, I really want to make sure that young people feel energized by this and also know that this win is your win. Like being able to see a 25-year-old sitting here as state party chair. I'm here on the back of every other young Democrat that came before me in the state of North Carolina, but also across this country. And it's an amazing thing to be able to say and see one of ourselves, I think, in a position like this. And I don't take it lightly. I hold it with all of the weight that this position comes with and that my age comes with in it too, because I want to make you all proud. And I know that that's a really hard thing to do right now when you're looking at the political system that we're in, but I want young people to feel like that you can change it. And that's really the empowerment that I want to give to young people too, because Person County, when we flipped the Roxborough City Council, I didn't know that was going to happen. And we weren't really running that race to make that happen. We were running it because we were like, we have candidates that we believe in, that we are excited about, and we know that we would go to town for them any day long. And I'm like, that's what I want to energize young people with, is the ability to be like, I can make change in my own backyard. And it comes from me getting excited and energized and motivated to do something I may never have done before.
And in that same vein, what do you say to young folks who say, well, the Democratic Party leadership is not representative of me, because when I look at the president, when I look at some of the, we just recently had a transition from the Speaker Pelosi giving the minority leadership to Hakeem Jeffries, and you had Steny Hoyer stepping down, and you had Representative Jim Clyburn step down. Despite that, there are many folks that say that, the fact that we still have someone who's 80 years old in the White House, we still have young people really looking like they're taking a back seat in the Congress. What is your message to them, that the Democratic Party is not overlooking them and that they still have a huge role to play moving forward?
I'd say that you have every right and every ability to change what that leadership looks like. And I'm not necessarily to say that that's easy and that it happens overnight. I think it happens from a lot of building and a lot of working. And the thing that bothers me being 25, I'm an impatient person. I've never really had the ability or the time to wait, but I will say the urgency is here and it's now, and people want change. The average age of the person that elected me in my SEC was 68 years old. So it's not just young folks that are ready for change. It's older generations too that are ready to see it across the board. Believe that and believe in yourselves and know that you have every ability and every resource at your disposal to do that, especially me. And I hope that all of you, whoever's interested in getting involved with state party leadership or also county party leadership even, because I think that a lot of times our county parties, I love them to death and I love our party leadership in every capacity, but sometimes we make roadblocks in order to keep people from getting elevated into positions of power in our party. And I think that we've got to take every bit of ownership over that and help each other and make it easier for young people to get in these positions. So if you're interested in running for any sort of statewide or state party office, please come talk to me and reach out. Find me on Twitter, find me on social media after this. But I would love to gab with any young person out there who's thinking about doing something like this and helping you think through that process. My network is your network. So use me.
Well, Ms. Clayton, I thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you this evening. Is there anything else as we conclude that you would like to, let the audience know about what's going on with the DNCs as we're now basically in a 2024 election cycle? We already have candidates declared their candidacy for president, Nikki Haley and Donald Trump, and there's going to be some others. There's going to be now soon an oncoming announcement about where the DNC is going to be held in 2024. There are those who are competing for Atlanta. There are those who are competing for Chicago. I heard New York was in the mix. We're going to start being bombarded by more political news, it seems, rather than less. What is your message to those who are maybe apathetic, maybe feeling a little bit detached from the political process, or maybe just a little overwhelmed about all of the political news coming at once? And why should they be able to still remain consistently involved and make the effort to ensure that their votes are cast, that they're that they follow all the procedures no matter what state they're in, and that they're an active and engaged citizen?
Yeah, I think it's really easy to be disengaged right now. And I think that honestly, it's the easier thing to do. And not saying like it's easy as in everybody wants to, but more so just like it's really hard to be involved with politics and stay afloat and informed about what's going on. And I think take the space that you need to take and rest, and really, decompress from this last election cycle, but also think about the fact that we have so much to gain from what we can change going into 2023 and 2024. And I think that when you're thinking about what do you want this future to look like and the opportunity of what we can build, hanging on to that and remembering that we got involved with this for a reason and that we're here for the bigger picture. And I think that the bigger picture means looking past how angry and how tired we can be right now and looking towards the righteous fight, honestly, that we have left ahead of us, because that is what I really feel going into 2024. And I'm not going to use the trope of like it's the most important election of our lives, because I think every election will always be that for us, especially as young people right now, honestly. But I think it's making sure that you're finding what drives you in life and what makes you passionate, and then acting on that in your own community. And hopefully that means getting involved with the Democratic Party. But I also, I know that folks are a little disengaged with politics in general from both the Republican and the Democratic side. And I want to be able to own that. And what I've told every Democrat, especially throughout North Carolina this year, is that I'm not only here to win over everyone else's vote, but I'm here to win over my own Democratic Party vote. Because I know that we've got to fight for Democrats too this year, just like we do everybody else. And that's what this party really wants to do. We want to fight for you. We want to fight for your vote. And we want to make sure that, we're here for you.
Well, Ms. Clayton, thank you so much. And I'll just add, the stakes are high. I know we didn't talk about the student loan debt crisis, but that's another issue that a lot of young people may be thinking about. And you got to
change, Mike, and like every other issue that I feel like is impacting us, imploding on us. People look at me and they're like, why now as a 25-year-old? And I'm like, why? How can I wait? Like, how can any of us wait to get involved, wait to do something, wait to like change something, wait to fight for something? Get to a city council meeting, y'all. Like, I'm not kidding. The things that you will learn in those meeting rooms and your school board meetings, if you're worried about book bannings right now, go volunteer to be on your public library board, because it's happening in your own backyard. And like, the things that we're so focused on up here above our heads sometimes, like we can be fighting them in our own communities, and you can actually win in your own communities. What's going on up here, sometimes we don't have the control over it. And I really do believe that like right in your own local community, you have so much power. So I hope y'all use it. Amen
and amen. And I will say this, I think about Bobby Kennedy's quote, to look at things as they are and ask why not. And then I also think about President Obama's quote, be the change that you want to see. The temptation to wait for someone else to just to stand in the bridge is always going to be there. And I think that, especially now that we're in an age where people don't feel as if there's a sense of community anymore. We live a lot of our lives behind screens. We live a lot of our lives on social media and in virtual realities. That there's a temptation to watch politics as a spectator sport and to be detached from it. But, as you've made clear tonight, it has such a personal and tangible effect on your life. If you pay taxes, if you go to school, if you have debt, if you, have a family member who's sick, if you're sick, right? If you're living next to a landfill. We didn't talk about environmental justice, but that's another thing and the environmental justice movement started in North Carolina.
I
Nice.
was like, stay tuned for our next segment, honestly, on
Yep.
all of these. We'll do an issue-based one more time.
So, Ms. Clayton, thank you so much for what you brought. I'm so grateful to you for making time to be on this platform. And I want to leave an open invitation whenever you would like to come back on. It was a wonderful experience to speak with you and to get some valuable insight from you as the party chair of the DNC. I wish you all the best in my home state, North Carolina. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and conclude. I'm going to go ahead and conclude episode 101. Episode 101 of the Political Mike podcast. Thank you so much, Ms. Clayton.
Thanks, Mike.
Hi, it's Mike Taylor, the host of the Political Mike podcast. If you like what you heard tonight, I want to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I also want to ask you to please follow along on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and Amazon Music. You can also follow along and keep up with the conversation through our Telegram channel. Follow us on Twitter at @ThePollyMike, and follow us on Instagram. Thank you so much, and no matter what part of the political spectrum that you fall on, I want to encourage you to stay engaged, stay a part of the conversation, and stay informed. Thank you.